Welcome to Fontribute, where we talk about fonts and their attributes. Fontribute. It's me again, Thomas, and I'm here again with Erin.
Hi, hello.
Hey, everybody. So, Erin, what are we talking about this week?
We're looking at two display typefaces with an emphasis on texture. As you can see already, these are some pretty funky designs. The first typeface we're looking at is Preissig Antikva, which is one of my favorite typefaces of all time.
Mm,
Love it. It was designed like in the, I think, 1912 by Wojciech Preissig, however you pronounce that, a Czech designer. And this is a digitization of it by Storm Type Foundry. The other typeface we're looking at is Lisbeth Display, which was released by Type Together rather recently.
excellent. I could definitely see a theme in this is the texture, right?
Mhm.
The texture between these two. I could see very much this is going to be what we're going to be exploring in the next couple of slides. As my
Oh
phone
yeah.
goes off. Pardon me.
Very cool. Yeah, it'll be interesting. You can already kind of see some big differences just looking at it right now, but let's look at the theme of texture. So where should we start? N, our
Good
favorite.
old N.
Good old N. Would you
Yes.
like to begin?
Yeah, I'll roll in. So I think the first thing we can see is the approach of notice the terminal system decisions across both. Like they both have a sense of italic, but one is using these exit terminals to kind of create a secondary momentum, while Lisbeth less so, or at least is it not direct implying. Like I have an overall implying of an italic like this, but because of the way these stems have been handled, it's kind of folding on themselves. They're like vertical themselves, but the impression is italic because of that, as opposed to the approach we see in Preissig and Vig. I still can't bring. I'm just gonna go with Preissig for now, just to
Okay.
keep it simple. So that was probably the first kind of nature of italics difference between the two I see. What else do you see, Aaron?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that because yeah, this is more of like an implied serif, like the way this wedge stroke is sort of used. And as you can see, there's a lot of repetition in Lisbeth. We've got a kind of a wasting right here. There's going to be, you'll see this throughout the design, that there's a thin in the middle of the character, which is really unusual. Usually typefaces, it's thick through the middle to kind of establish sort of a strength and I don't know, just establish it to keep it from looking like it's dancing, tipping over. But Lisbeth is dancing, and we've got very repetitious forms. So this is, these are literally the same shape. This is very, very similar to this shape up here. So that's going to be interesting. Also to note, even though they have a lot of differences, this approach here is less in Preissig is less repetitious. There's a lot of different angles going on. Things aren't treated exactly the same. This angle is different from what's happening over here. But it's kind of cool to see that they're both similar in using contrast, I would say. We've got, check out the thin areas here. We've got some thins, we've got some thicks. And overall, if you squint, maybe Lisbeth is touch, maybe a touch darker, but I don't know. It's kind of the weight differences end up with kind of a similar overall weight effect, even though they're completely different structurally. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I would agree. The other note to say, I noticed it's not like there's a kind of organicness, right, in the Presswig approach because so it's kind of like heaviness of it's like feels like the weight's heaviest up here, like the I feel like I get this sense of thickening towards this upper quadrant up here, right, which you're kind of getting a similar feeling a little bit, at least in different totally different strategies to achieve that same result. So it's like kind of folding onto itself. And kind of a lot of internal or organic momentum inside the letter. Let's think again as the approach of because of how flat-sided the curves are handled right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would agree with that, saying that Preissig, we're going to notice throughout the letters that they're not necessarily like the weight isn't necessarily distributed symmetrically throughout the letter. There is a lot more weight happening on that side. Whereas Lisbeth as a whole, I think the designer was trying to make it slightly more symmetrical, but we shall see. Anyway,
Yes,
should we go to the next letter?
we
Oh,
can move.
yes. Oh, crunchy O. Gosh, do I love crunchy typefaces like this. Oh God. Anyway, it's so cool to see. I mean, they actually kind of have a similar sort of
Axis,
angle,
yeah.
axis happening, but we've got the pointy approach on Preissig, and Lisbeth actually, they chose, so we noticed those kind of wedge shapes before, and in this case that wouldn't really work for an O, so the designer decided to just make a simplified form, but still kind of keeping the same weight kind of angle happening. So what do you notice?
Yes, I think actually the kind of the big surprise is, even though formally they seem very different on the initial approach, their overall kind of distribution of weights, right? Relative, it's not that far off. Again, this is feeling a little more, the angle is so much narrower, like kind of I don't know if steeper is the right word. No, not steeper, probably the other way. Like basically not as italic for Lisbeth, right? Versus the more italicized feeling we're getting from Preissig. But yeah, I think definitely the part that's very surprising, that their way they're distributing their weight is actually not too far apart, besides the obvious difference of crunchiness versus smoothness.
And notice how narrow Lisbeth is. I think we'll notice that throughout as well, that there's going to be some narrow characters in that typeface.
Yeah.
Interesting. Shall we move? Oh, yes.
When the parts come together.
Oh, cool. Yeah, here we got a combination of the round and the somewhat straight. I guess you can call it a straight descender. So again, with Preissig, we've got a lot of interesting kind of extra lines coming out for the entry and exit strokes, terminals, whatever you want to call them. And it's, it's very cool to see this thick and thin distribution. There's a lot of attention paid to these thin strokes that you really want them, the designer really wanted them to be visible. I think that's quite interesting. And also just the deep cuts, very cool. And seeing how the angle kind of changes and goes in and out. It's very, very interesting to see. Lisbeth is a lot more smooth transition. But again, if it's hard to remember maybe the first slide, but the N, it looked kind of like that. And we have kind of a similar approach up here, similar sort of shapes. And this is a lot more similar to the O curve. So it's pretty cool, I would say. What do you see?
Yeah. I definitely see some more family relations, in the sense that, again, notice the widening of the stem. Whoops. The widening of the stem over here versus this section over here. Much like, again, the thinning over here versus the widening over here. Likewise, we have a round unit, which then pushes up, and then you give kind of this joint connection over here. Likewise, joint connection, round, joint, as such, between the two. Now, there's some obvious, some other things. Notice, again, the dramatic weight of adding weight here versus less here. The joint is much higher up in Preissig versus Lisbeth's lower joint over here between the two. But yeah, I think I definitely see, again, this kind of introduction of serifs, right, and terminals that add secondary textures to it, as well as, like you said, all this crunchy greatness, right, we see over here. So yeah, those are my points I see.
And while we're here, we'll just note Lisbeth's X height is taller, but their ascender is not as tall. So how do I say that? Does that make sense? Yes, that makes sense.
I mean, yeah, basically, we can definitely, it gets a little complicated. Okay, within this system, I would say Lisbeth has a higher X height.
Yes, yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, because of the parts compared to each other, how big this space is to this, right, versus this space.
Yep. Looks good.
So there you go. Cool.
Whee! So that was fun. So if you notice that transition, this is literally the same shape that we just saw on the D on Lisbeth, because they chose a simplified G. But it's very cool to see how this indent is happening, because again, I'm sorry, I have to keep referring to that iron. No, that's not right. The that sort of shape, this was kind of continued that we saw in the N, and then this sort of somewhat similar to the flaring out gesture. I just wanted to note that, because it's hard to see Lisbeth, how repetitious it is without seeing it in context, which you will notice later. But just want to mention that. Whereas Preissig is just very, again, kind of crunchy a lot. This is very different than the other letters. There's not as much repetition since it's a two-story G, obviously, but very fun to see this angle and just how thin that gets in there. Anything you want to comment about?
Yeah, that thinness of this, kind of that neck reminds me of what we saw in the D, for example, right? Basically with this area right here. So we see parts relate to other parts. I think also what's interesting is like how far back this neck connects through, right? Because there's other necks that start up more on this side, for example, right here versus what it's doing, which is like all the way in the back from this side of the round part. I think it's a very interesting part about it, which makes sense. Everything's so dramatic about it. So I feel like that makes sense to do that approach as well.
Right, right. Yeah, that bottom half is very far, like, there's a lot of motion and thrust going toward the left. It's pretty cool. Also interesting to note, just in comparing, I mean, even though they both have a lot of texture in them, like, just there's so many more corners happening in Preissig. I know we've kind of mentioned that before, but and curves aren't necessarily always treated with the same number of corners and stuff, whereas Lisbeth is a lot more systematic. So we'll notice that throughout. Very interesting.
Yes.
Crunchy. Okay. Would you like to start?
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting. One is just a structural decision. One is this is a kind of a continuous stroke system where the K comes down, up and around, and over, right? When this one's feeling more kind of interrupted stroke construction, I guess you want to call it that. So because we can tell because the terminals, right, kind of compare how these two compare to each other. That's definitely one point we can see. We can see the system of ascenders, right, matching to their, their sisters. When we see the other letters, right, the D, for example, if you recall that from before. Yeah, and I like Erin's point about the number of harsh points, the kind of the curves. And actually notice there's actually moments here. You can see a little curve right here, and I can see little curves, like a little curve transition right here. So I think Preissig also might give the impression of overall crunchiness, like everything's straight lines, but we can see that. I can see that kind of here. Actually, I see some kind of some roundness in actually some of these areas. It's very fascinating. So it's actually not so programmatic in such a how best to put this, in such a flattening way. Like everything is treated exactly the same. There's actually a lot more nuance going on in the Preissig approach than what one would assume initially. That's my main impression so far.
Yeah. Also interesting, like notice, they chose this kind of sort of, I guess you call it a ball terminal type thing on the K, whereas in the G, you'll notice the ear was a triangle. So, not everything is treated like literally the same. And Lisbeth, I did include this because this is quite, this is kind of a very distinctive feature of the typeface. There's a lot of, open space happening throughout here. I'm sure that this could have been constructed in a different manner, but this is, I think the designer probably wanted to keep as close to that, look, broken record, that same kind of rhythm happening as possible. So they kept that area open because they didn't want to put any darkness in that wasted area where it's supposed to be thin. So I think that was probably why that was chosen. So interesting.
I will also notice a certain kind of wiggle, like kind of thinning
that's
over
unusual.
here. The first thing on the end, and there's kind of a wiggle effect, right? Take notice of that.
Yeah.
So it's not exact. So at least the K in Lisbeth is not exactly dogmatically following the same structure we see in this section right here.
Right. Okay. Very true. Cool.
T. Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. I included this one because of obviously we've gotten in a couple of letters, the R and the T, there's a little disconnected piece, which was kind of like surprising to see. And yeah, as you've noted here, we've got like a little kind of breaking of the same rhythm system. Do you want to talk about it a little?
I mean, well, a couple of things. One is just notice, that this is a different structure than we've seen before. And then this upstroke is also different than what we've seen before. So we see, so it's obviously not following its logic dogmatically all the way through.
Yeah.
Right. So we can see that true. I want you to take a note here in Preissig here, Sig here, that take notice that then I think a natural people would assume that this crossbar would be the thinnest part with this, but notice this was not the case in this design, right? This is actually a medium weight compared to the thin strokes we see in the letter, and it appears to be some cool like tapering in, like little taper in this way and this way. Very cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, I won't belabor anything. I'll try to be a little faster today. Let's keep going. Oh, one
Oh,
more.
oh,
Okay, I had to include a weird character. So we usually don't talk about this, but there's one Lisbeth, the Z, that was a challenging one to work with the system, so I wanted to include it because it's, it looks maybe more like a two, but it's really hard to make a Z with this sort of constraint.
system.
Yeah, and Preissig, I love this because, all the other ones we've seen so far all had little bits of roundness. This one's the Z, it's hard to make round, obviously, but I love how it's like jutting further to the right, and this is going up on this side up a little bit higher. It's not what you would expect. They didn't keep it all flat. The designer uh, uh, made it just very lively, I guess, organic, and even within here, it's thicker here, it's a little thinner here, more tapering. It very dynamic character. I really like it. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I agree. Presswork definitely has a program where it's like this zone is the highest priority, right? Things kind of erupt upwards, right? If it has an ascender, it erupts up to up here, but if it sits the X height, it's kind of pushes up weight up there. And it definitely tries to, even though it's actually I'm a little surprised by this form. I figured, well, then again, the K was like that too. The K did this form of shape more or less. So
Yeah.
I think this vocabulary does make sense to effectively have a kind of little a little angleness on the
Hmm.
baseline sitting part of the terminal of the Z in this case. So like I see how it
Yeah.
makes sense between the two, as opposed to what you would, I guess, in full italics you would expect something like that, right?
Sure, sure.
So yeah,
Yeah, it'll be interesting when we see text settings because you'll notice there's most of the characters have like an angled baseline in Preissig, which is very cool. I love it. This will be interesting also. I think the S, although this is kind of similar to what the solution had to be for the S. The S looks more resolved, like it looks more natural in the system. But we'll check out the other characters. That's Oh, right, here we go.
yes, starting to see the magic come together.
Oh, ooh, yeah, wow,
So by the way,
crazy,
Stephanie,
crazy.
I already see your point. I actually noticed some angling, like in the top of of the serifs on the H, for example, right? So I actually see what you
Hmm.
mean by that.
Yeah, even this, like, look at this. I know this is really subtle, might be hard to see on screen. This is lower than this one.
Then
This
this
one's a
one,
little higher up. So
yeah,
I love it. This is why I love pre-digital type design. People actually did weird stuff like this. You don't see this very often, and everyone's trying to be all standardized. I love this stuff. Anyway,
mm.
calm down, Aaron.
There's also
I
a
mean,
great
you're
thing.
breaking
Like,
the
no,
design.
it's all good. Also notice the heaviness here versus the thinning out of that
Mhm.
area. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot of nuances going on.
Lot going on. So overall, like again, I forgot the point of this slide. I should have mentioned at the beginning. We like to show what the relationship is between cap height, and obviously we've got a bigger jump for Preissig is between the ascenders. You don't see that too often with such a big gap with how much higher the ascenders are, which is kind of fun to see. Um, Also notice, obviously, we've got huge differences in width. The capital letters of
Yeah,
Preissig are enormously wide compared to like the Lisbeth. They're essentially like this might only be a touch wider than the H. It's the lowercase. It's much more similar. And again, let's just observe there are a few elements in Lisbeth where the designer decided to have little floating elements. So we'll have to check those out in text. I'm not so sure. I'm not too fond of them, but we'll see. We'll look at them.
yes,
Cool. What's
cool.
next? I think I put one more letter. Yeah, okay. Um,
Yeah,
since it's been a while since we saw that end slide, I just wanted to show that this capital M, that same kind of rhythm was used as often as possible, even in the uppercase letters as well with Lisbeth. So the waist is a little bit higher, I think, in the uppercase, I believe. I think it's a little
yeah, they're
longer.
longer. Yeah, these shapes are
Um,
much longer.
yeah, but so this is what you're going to see when we look at the typeface as a whole. Tons and tons of repetition in Lisbeth and in Preissig. I mean, God, look at how cool these weight differences are. Ooh, I love it. Anyway, I'll calm down.
It's very cool. I know you're a fan of this. I agree. It is a very,
Ah, tasty.
it's a very fun project.
Yes.
All right, so now the pieces are
Yay.
starting to come together. We're
Yep.
starting.
Yep.
So, I mean, for me, I can already start seeing clearly like the texture is a theme for this episode, right? There's the overall impression I'm getting from the Persig that again, like kind of everything's crunchy, everything's folding over. There's a lot of kinetic energy going on inside the letters and between the letters. While again, look at the M. Look at how these ascenders are shooting up so high up. It's very in some ways very chaotic, right? Basically, because everything's
Mm-hmm.
moving around in such crazy ways. So it gives a very organic and lively energy. And Lisbeth is also creating a very lively energy. You know, in this case, it's super repetitious. Like as we said, anytime I see a straight shape, they're treated so similar, and I almost get like an optical illusion looking at it. That's my impression so far.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So that's like, if you're going for that effect, this is be a good typeface to choose. And again, like it's really happening because this waist area was made so thin. It really looks like it's almost moving. And there are a few moments, like we said, where the rules had to be broken, here in some of the curved shapes where the waist isn't, completely, um, I think that keeps it from, well, I don't know. I don't know if it'd even be possible to make those letters fall following that same system. Probably not, but it's like it's a crazy effect, really strange. And also just notice how condensed Lisbeth is compared to Preissig. Again, like just want to reiterate that. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I have to note, just because it's up here, this makes me sad.
Yes, it does.
Got some
Got some
issues
weird
on
spacing.
this digitization. I wish that had been taken care of, but no one thought they were going to be writing Hamburg Don'tsiv. So anyway, we shall continue, shall we? Yes, we shall. Oh, I love this slide. Oh yeah.
Yo, it's got that cool version of it. Yeah,
Oh.
that's
When
great.
I saw the accented characters the first time I saw this typeface, and some of the other like famous Czech designers of this era, like the are just so phenomenal. I just love when diacritics really, really emulate what's happening elsewhere in the typeface instead of just looking like they're plastered on. So I really love this. This is an A ring, obviously. You can see a more traditional approach down here in Lisbeth, but like, oh, I just love this.
Mm.
Look, your favorite,
Yep, the
slanted
slanted
irises. Yeah,
tires.
yeah, yeah. And so tilde,
Actually, through that, the tilde is the shit. Look at this thing.
yeah,
It's
it's
crazy.
so cool. And yeah,
Your
circumflex is like,
circumflex.
it's more of a, I mean, I guess if you're writing by hand, like maybe that's your, I don't know, maybe you would
I
make
guess
it
it
look
looks
like
like
that
it's
more.
drunk, like a drunk
It's
party.
cool. I love it. And these are the Q and Grav are very like upright, adding to that textural effect. So
Very tricky.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I just had to gush about how much I love them. I love the oversized quotes and italics and stuff. And also, they still have some of that what's going on elsewhere in the typeface, lots of different angles and levels, little bits of curve. These were all very well considered. And I would say the same for Lisbeth. Like, I think the same logic was applied very well to these punctuation marks over here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think we should be fair to Lisbeth. Like, this is actually not a bad approach per se.
Yeah,
It
they're
just doesn't.
great.
Yeah, it just doesn't have that same craziness of energy as
Mm-hmm.
Preissig has per se. So that's why we're going a little nuts on the top guys.
Sure, sure.
Also,
Yeah.
I do think this is actually in terms of strategy when you're designing diacritics. If you have a very large acenter space, remember how the acenter is so huge in Preissig, is
Mm-hmm.
that actually allows lots of room upstairs for these kind of decisions, like a very perky upright acute and grave, for example, right?
True.
The smaller this space is, the less liberty you're going to have if you're watching out for that vertical metric space, if you're thinking about that.
Very, very true. Very cool.
Yes. I will say also again, in things that make me sad.
Oh yeah, whenever,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I need, yeah, that's hard. Maybe just people, yeah, even this. I don't know if people need better punctuation kerning proofs just to learn all the different ways people use punctuation in different, different language traditions. I don't know.
Combinations.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's move on forward. All right. Oh, whoa.
Holy yeah. I mean, I know these
Wow.
are obviously display typefaces, but in the event someone's going to use it for slightly larger, like, well, I don't know, like maybe a large paragraph of text, I thought, let's look at this. And yes, I agree. Whoa, there's so much craziness going on in Lisbeth display.
Yeah. It's
Do you want,
vibrating.
yeah, do you want to go speak first?
I guess. I mean, the main dude is it's just, yeah. I mean, the shape is so repetitious that my eyes are like getting tripped out looking at it. It's like I'm tripping on LSD, looking like the page is literally vibrating at me. when I look at it. And I think
Yeah.
the part that I'm actually very impressed about, actually, to be fair to her, this design, is it actually holds like I was looking at the hamburger font style below, and I thought shapes like like basically whenever the round straight or just the rounds in general, because the rounds are not able to produce the exact same form as the straight parts. Like those are the I feel like it's holding up well enough to maintain the rhythm of this being consistent about it. But it's certainly like, yeah, this is like the pattern is so overwhelming it takes over the entire color looking at it. Meanwhile, with Preissig, it's there, but it's more secondary, right? There's definitely a texture and color I'm feeling looking at it, but it's not overwhelming to the point where it overpowers the readability of the text itself.
Yeah, I would agree. I think my main when I look at Lisbeth, I mean, I love the concept, and I think, like you said, these round characters actually work really well, like surprisingly well within the system. But to me, one thing I think the space character is far too small. Like this is all kind of
Yeah.
running together. And just in general, I think it's too tightly spaced. Like I wish it had more room to breathe. Like I think it might even be improved if the positive and negative shapes, like if the spacing, if there's a little bit more breathing room in there. Because when these words are just so close together and everything's so scrunched, it's like I find it very hard to read. Maybe that's what you want this for. You want it to be hard to read, but I sure don't. And
Okay.
I don't know, but I think I think it could be improved if someone, maybe I should rent this again from Font Stand or whatever and just do some tests. And if the graphic designer using this can like massage it a little and add a little bit more space, it might be a little bit more usable, I think, at this sort of size. But I think it looks pretty good. Or, it's pretty interesting. Even with, I mean, this is hard too. Like the X, there are a lot of
Yeah.
difficult characters to try to conform to a system like this. Also cool in this slide, seeing capital
Yeah.
letters, look how narrow these are. And also I loved seeing the brackets versus well, here are the brackets versus the parentheses, how they were both treated in these typefaces. I thought that was kind of cool.
That's one. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. Should we go look at the actual size these might be
Yeah,
used
more
for?
intentional usage of it. Yeah.
Yes. Although percent, I don't know who's going to do this, but I just had to
I
include
mean,
this
who
cool
knows? Oh God,
percent.
that percent set. Yeah, that's cool.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
that's some
good
good
stuff.
stuff.
Yeah,
Tasty.
it's fun. By the way, again,
So
I just want to state the point that of accent characters are really are part of the vocabulary of type design. Because like notice like how much flavor these accent characters have in the words, right? Especially in Preissig. Like it really feels like an intentional part of the project, and I think it adds a whole nother level of vocabulary to the project because of that. It's very refreshing. I really enjoy it.
yeah, that was cool. And I wonder, I mean, I should read more about it, but obviously since the designer of this was a Czech designer, and I know like even just in the first samples I saw of this typeface, I mean, you could tell that this was designed to use those. That was the intent. They would be used by the person designing it. So nativity, I mean, I know is kind of a tricky subject. That's something I deal with too, trying to design typefaces for scripts or languages that you don't yourself use. It's like it might require a different kind of perspective to do that. And obviously this was home to that designer. This Anyway, I really like how those work. Oh, I should have included the lowercase p in the. I love that. I kind of look at how interesting this is, how high the ascenders are and
Yeah, how
how
short the
the
descenders
descenders. I
are.
forgot to show that. That's kind of cool. I like this um, form. Anyway, this also makes me hurt. So
Yeah,
obviously, all caps settings were not considered with this spacing and kerning of Preissig digitization by storm, unfortunately. But anyway, I love the texture of this. Obviously, I could go on and on. I think it's overall it's pretty well. I love just how big these freaking quote marks are. Just absolutely love it. So onto Lisbeth. Again, I mean, I think it's definitely better than at the smaller sizes, being able to see it. Like this word seems very readable to me. I think I can read that quite well. Um, to me, the things that pop out, still the moments where it becomes a little more stencil-like when it's not
yeah,
connected, that kind of catches my eye a little bit. I'm not so sure about that. Like I kind of wish that maybe those could have been connected just by a tiny thin mark, but whatever. You get what you get. So do you have any comments you'd like to say about
Yes,
Lisbeth?
I would say I'm definitely not convinced on the narrowness of the caps in general.
Yeah.
Like I'm not sold. I'm not sure. I don't see the I think it's an example where the rhythm was so essential it overtook even other considerations. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think it was it's too over it's the problem is the caps are actually literally losing legibility. Like the cap actually feels smaller. Like this cap H
Yeah.
feels smaller than the numbers, right? For example. It's
Yeah.
very weird that's the case, but that's what it feels like from my eye. I think
Mm-hmm.
they're way too narrow. And then that Z is just no bueno. Like it just doesn't work. Uh
Yeah.
per se. And I'm not convinced on things like this B. Basically, I feel like the caps are just a lost opportunity. Uh I think it's an example where the designer was thinking too much in one tempo. Like it's like one texture throughout the whole project. Not, and I feel like
Yeah.
type designers actually what it really is really at the minimum two textures. There's a caps and a lowercase, and the key is they have to harmonize together because they come from different logics, different systems of writing, so they have to be harmonized together. And I think this is the case where the tech was too hard to try to merge them together into one voice, into
Mm,
one texture, and I don't think it was fully successful because of that.
sure. However, I do like that this kind of interesting entry stroke was used on a lot of the characters to kind of like bring it closer to the I do kind of like that. That's kind of unusual and I think that worked really well. I like that. But I agree. I kind of wish there were more width variation in this typeface just overall to help with legibility and just to break up the monotony. I think it might be too regular in some ways. I don't know.
Yeah,
It just depends on what you're going for, but this is I mean, there are some really cool moments like how these things interact. It's quite interesting. So obviously you could use this in a lot of kind of interesting ways depending on I kind of wish there were still wish there were maybe an alternate T and R or something because that's catching my eye quite a bit, but I really like it. There's a lot of potential for cool usage in Lisbeth. And Preissig is like you said, I mean it's more the proportions overall are a lot more similar to a regular sort of texty typeface. So that it's interesting that texture, you really got to show it up close to see that, to see the textural elements. Very cool.
very cool.
Ah, love it.
Hypnotic angles. Wow.
Wow. I want to fill up more space. Lisbeth is just so narrow that to try to make, when you have these two side by side, in the slides, we try to treat them similarly with always the same point size when we can and settings. So anyway, wanted to make a little bit more oomph here. Also note, I never include this, but now we get to see what
Yeah.
some of those other N dashes look like and stuff. But what are your thoughts about these two designs?
Well, like I said, I mean, I think the last I kind of concluded, I basically conclude that again, both are dealing with textures in very different ways, and one of the big problems in texture is like, do you want everything to be the same texture and overriding all logic, which is I think is the big problem with Lisbeth overall. If I had to give a critique on it or a point of thought, I think it explored very interesting ideas, job of harmonizing rounds and straights, especially in the lowercase, to achieve the goal. But I think in other sections like the R and the T in the lowercase or the capitals, the widths and just design decisions were compromised in a way that I think they could be explored better. Well, Preissig, I really am impressed by like kind of the organicness and the nuanced thinking behind its logic and its texture across the uppercase and lowercase, and with really interesting considerations on ascender versus descender space to deal with accent characters. I think about it. Like they didn't apply the same logic to the ascenders they did it for the descenders in Preissig, and I think that was part of why it's so successful as an approach.
Nice. Yeah, I would agree that um, the texture is a lot more subtle, I guess, in Preissig, even though it has far more angles and corners. It's kind of interesting how that works. Um, and it's nice for me to see like texture even just on the okay, we were looking at the micro level of texture on a single character, but also texture includes, like you were saying, heights and widths. So the texture of Preissig, the fact that these are the capital letters, they're large and bold and there's a lot of height differentiation happening. I think that just kind of adds an extra element to the system that I really like. Lisbeth is a lot more kind of literal in its take of texture in terms of like, let's make everything crazy with the same set of rules. There are some things that I didn't like quite so much about it, but it's a really interesting concept. And if you pick the right combination of letters, it's going to look pretty darn cool. Also, one final note, this W makes me think this could have a really cool Hebrew companion.
Yeah,
Something.
yeah. It has a reverse dress kind of
Anyway.
orientation. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd agree.
something about that. Anyway.
Excellent.
Ah.
Well, here we are, Erin. We completed another week
Yes.
episode of Fontribute. I look forward to having you in conversation again next week.
Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for checking it out. Go have fun with texture, y'all.
Yes, and if any questions, observations, or suggestions, what do you want us to talk about? You know, we're all, I think, how many weeks has it been, Erin? We've been doing this together.
It's been a
For a
while. A couple months
right?
now. Several
I
months.
know. So you guys, if any fonts you want us to explore and do analysis on, leave a comment and we'll be happy to honor that. All right.
If you want us to talk less, if you say, I can't listen any longer than 25 minutes, also comment. Let's hear your feedback.
Or if you want to go hour-long talks, which we have done. So the world is an oyster. You just let us know what you think. I hope that you join us next week on Fontribute. Erin, I'll talk to you then.
Bye.
Bye.